Somos Viña.
We Are Vineyard.
And a lot of our friends, had been swept up in faith in the Jesus movement, and they'd all kind of landed at this evangelical Presbyterian church. And so we started to go there, and now we're in this environment of more intimate faith or something, how you would describe it, and, good people, kind people, but still the experience of church itself and the pastor. It was a very large church and a very good communicator, but the service lasted 55 minutes, and it was the longest 55 minutes of my life. I mean, stand up, sit down, a few organ-led hymns and choir, and I found it brutal. I thought, I think it was that point. You would think it would be earlier, but at that point, I started to think, wow, I got to be in church for the rest of my life as a Christian. I began to think, maybe the way to go out is in a blaze of glory. Maybe I find somewhere in the world where they're killing Christians. I'll be a missionary there, and it'll be over. Like, that's how bad I found it. I thought, oh my gosh.
I need an exit plan. Right. Yeah. Totally.
And this was, very live.
These are good people. Right. Yeah.
This is not, the judgment's probably more on me than anything, but I just found it so incredibly boring and so irrelevant to the kind of relationship I was trying to cultivate with God and how He was meeting me in the Bible. And I've always thought from that day that one of the greatest sins of church life is we managed to make Jesus a boring figure.
Right.
Because He's anything but boring.
Yeah.
He's absolutely transformative and challenging and revolutionary and will stretch you and surprise you. And so it just seemed like such a waste.
Welcome to the We Are Vineyard podcast, conversations to help us grow with Jesus and each other. In today's episode, our host, Jay Pathick, talks with David Parker. David Parker is the Pastor Emeritus of the Desert Vineyard in California. Let's listen in.
So we're here in Arvada. You've just spent days and days with our team, our leaders. You just taught Sunday. We've been working you like a dog. You'll
Not true.
We did get to go see the Nuggets.
Yes.
That was fun. And I know you'll be shocked to hear this, everyone listening, but we won again. World champs. But we've had a wonderful time.
Yeah.
And I was musing about this in our leaders retreat, that I think the first time I would have hung out with you was probably coming up on 30 years.
Yeah.
So I would have been 18 when I started work for Rich.
Yes.
So it's like, that's wild.
Yeah.
To think that I've gotten to be around you that long. And so on this thing, like I told you, we mostly tell stories. So I would just love to start where all good stories start, which is where you were born and where you grew up.
Yeah, I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. The Missouri part's very important for a Kansas City resident.
It is. Solely them.
Mostly. If you live in Kansas City, Kansas, I'm sure you're proud of that as well. But, but if you're from Kansas City, Missouri, you really don't want to be thought of as from Kansas.
Yes.
So I grew up there, grew up in a interesting mixed neighborhood, a lot of Irish Catholic, Italian Catholic families, and equal number of Jewish families. And so it was really, it was interesting.
Yeah. And what did your folks do? What landed them in Kansas City of all places?
They both were from there.
Okay.
Their families, my mother's in particular, had grown up in Waldo, which is very funny because back in the day, Waldo was this like cracker box area full of small houses and bad, commercial spaces. And now, with the gentrification happening everywhere, like Waldo's like a hipster place.
Right.
But so my family was from they're from Kansas City, and they built this house after the war and raised their family of 3 boys and a girl.
Wow. Okay. And what did your dad or mom do? What kind of stuff did they do?
My dad was the worst salesman in the world. And
that's quite a title. I mean, it's contested.
I think without a doubt, like it wouldn't be close. And was an engineer by training, and ended up engineering a thing called a roof scratcher, which is looks like a very fierce lawnmower that tears the tar gravel roof off of a flat roofed building.
Huh.
So he engineered this thing and tried to sell it. And I think one time he was testing or, showing it to potential clients on a second floor roof. And this thing dug into the roof with teeth, like rotating teeth.
Right, trying to get the tar off.
A drum of teeth. Yeah, it was a fierce thing. But it drug him right off the second story of the roof.
Gosh.
I mean, yes, he wasn't a successful entrepreneur.
It's like a Looney Tunes kind of scene.
So many things in my childhood were like that. But my mother, on the other hand, was, went into work in the 50s in the secretarial pool. I can't imagine what she faced in that world, a corporate job, a big corporation. But, you start out the bottom. And she worked her way up over time, was the, kind of the CEO's secretary. And then she became an HR manager. She held things together.
Yeah. Okay. So then you're raised, family in Kansas City. And what was like faith life? Was there any Jesus stuff, or was it not really?
The only consistent expression of Jesus' name in my house was a curse, very creative curse expression. My father was not only was he maybe the worst salesman ever, but he was maybe one of the better creative cussers ever. And so Jesus H. Christ was a familiar refrain. I didn't know what H stood for, if there was a middle name, and I certainly didn't know who Jesus was. And I mean, I was so ignorant of all things Christianity that I thought that, at Christmas time, like you'd hear these Christmas carols and Jesus Lord at his birth, that line. And I thought he was an English lord with a manor house. Wore frilly shirts. I assumed that. Jesus Lord at his birth.
Without explanation, that would make sense. Yeah. That's a logical conclusion.
Yeah. I did have religious exposure because I was friends with all my Jewish friends. If I was at their house for dinner or staying over on a Friday, I'd be in synagogue service with them, and it was entirely in Hebrew. I'd be wearing my yarmulke, listening to the Hebrew. And then if I were my Catholic friends, staying over, having dinner on a Saturday night, I might get drugged to Mass, which at the time in our local parish was entirely in Latin. So I thought growing up that religion was a foreign language I didn't understand, that I didn't speak. I was not interested in it. My mother had attachments, kind of casual attachments to a Methodist church, but other than a handful of Easters or something, there just wasn't any
nothing real
exposure.
About it.
No.
Yeah. So then how, as you're growing up in this thing, and you were an athlete, so you played sports, that was kind of your... It
was my salvation initially.
Yeah.
I mean, I was pretty self-destructive as a teenager, like a lot of kids were in the late 60s. But I was drinking, cheap whiskey out of my locker in the 7th grade every day. I was pretty destructive and would try anything. One of the most important stories of my junior high life was that a certain pack of, I don't know if I would call them friends, but people I hung out with had the brilliant idea to try heroin.
Oof.
And we're going to try it at this house after school. And I'll be there, I'll be there. And I think I was in 8th grade. And that day I got in trouble again. I was expelled from grade school. I mean, I was one of those kids who were super smart. So grades were never a problem. It's probably wrong to say I'm super smart, but grades weren't a problem.
Right.
But behavior was a massive problem.
Yeah.
And so I'd gotten in trouble in a French class in 8th grade and sent to the vice principal. And in those days they gave you swats. You bent over and they had a big paddle and they'd beat you, And so I was waiting in the office to get my swats. And then I was going to head off from there to this house to try heroin. And the French teacher that I gotten in trouble, and she was her first year teaching. She's probably 22 or 23, this little, young woman who's teaching hellions like me,
right.
And so she comes in where I'm waiting for the vice principal to administer my discipline. And she says that I want to take him with me to my class. And so he releases her. She takes me to her class and she sits me down. I wasn't he wasn't a huge person or anything, but she was very little. She sits me down, and so we're about like on eye level with each other. And she gets right in my face. And she says to me, "I've read your file. I've read your stuff." She says, "You are wasting everything that you've been given.
Wow.
Why are you doing this?" I didn't have an answer. No one had ever said to me, "Wow, you have potential."
No one ever
have
called
gifts.
anything out of you.
No,
right?
nothing.
Yeah.
So it was so stunning. Like, I didn't have an answer to that. Why am I this way? I just kind of stammered, And she just continued reading me the riot act about how I was throwing away my life and that I had these, gifts that people would love to have and all this stuff. And I walked out of that classroom in a daze. And I thought, I don't know. And I didn't go to that house that day. And a number of those kids died, not from that time, but they died in addiction, which I was certainly capable of.
Yeah, you're on the edge of.
Yeah.
But then you find sports.
Right. So then being a total, dissipated person and being an athlete don't go hand in hand. And I loved basketball. I didn't come from a family of tall people, but I just willed myself. I thought, I want to be 7 feet tall. Of course, that was a stretch. But I did, father's 5'7", I grew to 6'4", and I played on the streets, played in the parks, lived on the edge. Kansas City was a very segregated community in those days. But I was down, I was playing with the real players.
Yeah.
And I loved it.
Yep.
And it saved me initially. It restrained the self-destruction in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked to it like I could get what I wanted from basketball.
Mm-hmm.
I could get popularity, I could get girls, I could get noticed. And I got all those things. I was captain, co-captain of the high school basketball team. I was in the paper a lot. I was, it was very important to my salvation that I got, college scholarship offers, being courted by this or that. And it was so not satisfying.
Yeah.
It was like, really? Like this is that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like I thought it would.
Yeah.
It was disillusioning, which I think set me up for something that was more substantial and real.
So as you're finishing high school, you're thinking academically? Like, oh, I should go to college or...
Well, my mother, she was insistent.
Okay. Yeah.
And my older brothers were all smart and successful. I have a brother that's a doctor and one who's a mortgage banker and have advanced degrees. And they were quite a bit older than me. So the expectation was, you're just going to do this.
Yeah, do the next thing. Right.
You're going to do university and then, hopefully we'll get a lawyer out of it or something.
Right. But that's kind of cool that that was at least in the cards. Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, because
so
my
then
mom didn't have a college degree.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. She's like, okay, we're going to do this. So when does some kind of Jesus thing start to happen?
In a surprising fashion, I'm in love with a high school sweetheart who I think is in love with me, even though I'm a wild child. And
maybe because.
The bad boy thing is real. And she comes to me, though, and says, we can't see each other anymore because I'm getting serious about Jesus and you're not. You're not that. And I said, no, I'm not, and I never will be.
Right.
So goodbye. But 2 days later, I'm thinking, how can I talk her out of her faith?
Right.
I don't know what her faith is.
Yeah, I want to get her back.
But I'm thinking, it can't be that hard.
Right.
I go out and buy a Bible. Didn't have one. There wasn't one in the house. I went to some little bookstore in those days, and they had a little low shelf of Bibles, and there were black ones with gold lettering, and there was a paperback one that had young people on the front. It was called The Way. Some people will remember this. And it was a living Bible, kind of, I think, printed for as part of the Jesus movement, right? So I get that one, and I'm going to read it, figure out what she believes, and I'm going to talk her out of it. And so I started in Leviticus. I was arrogant. I thought, I don't need to start right at the beginning.
Right.
I'll just jump in. I'll pick up the story, whatever it is. And I was shocked, clean and unclean in this time of the month. And I'm thinking this is going to be like either easier or harder than I thought.
What
I have
even
no
is
idea.
this? Right,
I have
right.
no idea. And then somehow, I think at university or something, I said to someone, when I was trying to read the Bible for the first time, they said, skip on forward, go to the Gospel of John. I was really thrilled to hear skip on forward.
Yeah, exactly.
But read the Gospel of John. So I read the Gospel of John 2 or 3 times. Didn't understand it at all.
Right.
But I was intrigued by Jesus. He wasn't who I expected. I thought, this is interesting.
Yeah.
He's interesting. But that's as far as I got. But I kept working at it, and somehow I found my way backwards, and I'm in Isaiah 53. I'm reading Isaiah 53. Obviously now, very famous messianic passage about his suffering and sacrifice. But I'm reading, I have no idea really what it's talking about it. But the line, he's despised and he was despised and forsaken of men.
Yeah.
And when I read that line, it was like an arrow shot out of the page through my heart. Like it leapt on me with conviction. And I hear in my mind, I'm telling myself, you have done this. Because I was rabidly anti-Christian.
Right.
I like to make fun of not just purely out of spite, but there was so much hypocrisy as there is with any group of young people, and those who kind of pretended to be really something religious, and they were the same ones that were doing what I was doing in other occasions. So it all just seemed like
this is a joke.
And so I was hostile, and so it was like I just instantly knew that the person that this was talking about, that God had sent to bring, his resource, that the rejection, the despising, the forsaking of this one, I was an active participant.
Wow.
And I mean, I knew that.
You just knew it.
Crystal clear.
Wow.
And that led me to pray the first prayer I ever prayed, which was, it's like so many, God, if you're up there. I never prayed before. And I had a rough back. There was a lot of reason to pray.
Yeah.
I'd never prayed a prayer before. God, if you're up there, I'd really like to know. And if it has anything to do with Jesus, I'd like to figure that out too. I was sitting down when I prayed that prayer. I felt a little embarrassed and thought, gosh, I've gotten to the point where I'm talking to myself.
I'm losing it. Right.
Right. And I stood up, and that arrow that went through my chest, it's like it left a hole in my life. And I was filled with, I don't know a lot of rage, a lot of disappointment and hurt, a lot of confusion, I don't know. There's just a lot of stuff. And it felt like that hole, like stuff started to drain out. As I stood up, it started to drain out of, I literally looked at the floor thinking there might be a puddle there because it was so visceral. It was so like there's something draining out of me. And it wasn't as though, wow, I suddenly became a saint or anything.
Right.
But I just had this profound experience of God saying, yes, I'm here. And yes, it has something to do with Jesus.
And it's real. You're like, I don't know what this is. But
and I thought, oh no.
Wow.
I'm going to be one of those.
Wow. Yep.
Yeah.
So then how did you become one of those? Because you're by yourself.
Yeah.
You have this thing happen.
Yeah.
You have a Bible. You're in college or.
Yes, I'm in college.
So now you're like, I guess I got to do
go
something.
Back to Nancy and say, guess what? Are you available Friday night?
You are not going to believe what just happened to me.
She didn't.
Yeah.
She had friends, church friends, that we started to meet with, and I was told the basics. You read the Bible. I was already doing that. I thought got that one down. You pray. I'll pray. That's okay. And they, the language of the day, the pious language of the day is you go in your prayer closet.
Right.
And I was embarrassed because I knew my house didn't have a prayer closet.
Right.
And we had this little cracker box house that had one closet in the front room. and it was jammed full of coats, and it had one of those old canister vacuums in the bottom. But I thought, well, I got to do it. I'm a Christian now, and I made sure no one was around, and I
just take it all out
in there. I couldn't get in there. I like to wedge my way in there, sat on the canister vacuum, and closed the door, and it suddenly got very dark and very hot. And I thought, this is the weirdest thing. I've become this
How has this
weird
happened?
person.
Right.
I was told you had to give, 10% of your money. I thought, wow,
That's a lot.
I really don't
right,
like that one.
Right. That's a lot of money.
I was making $1.35 an hour, and then also that I had to go to church.
Right.
I really didn't like that. We went to the first church Nancy and I went to together. Was a very historic, beautiful stained glass stone church building in a very wealthy neighborhood. I don't know why we picked it. I think it had something to do with her sister, or I don't remember, but it was like, let's go there. We walked in and, we are 40 years younger than anyone
Exactly.
in the place. And I had long hair, and it was longer than most of the women.
Totally.
And we didn't dress as, we were so out of place.
You just stick out instantly. Yeah. Right.
But we, this is what you got to do. And it was a very, liberal, denominational church. And literally, because I was just interested in Jesus, I don't know anything, but I know that he's doing something. He's met me. And I would count it a really successful Sunday if Jesus was ever mentioned once.
Wow.
It just didn't happen. I got baptized in that church. But I really thought at that point that church was pretty irrelevant to my whole scheme of things and my relationship with Jesus.
Isn't it amazing, because I have a very similar story. Reading the Bible, doing this, have this sort of encounter with God. I ended up in the Southern Baptist Church, which was super conservative. And just really, they were in their 7th or 8th year in the book of Hebrews. So it's really
we have a 72-month series, on the book of Hebrews.
And we are in this, we are for real.
Wow.
And I just, so different than yours, because I didn't know anything at all. I just found myself feel just so confused. I didn't know. I just had no idea what was happening. It was like I was in another country, permanently. Somebody just dropped me in a village in a jungle. That's I don't understand what these words mean. I don't know. And my only persistent memories were being in the basement with a potluck of this church and people hugging me. Oh. And they had sweaters on. So it's kind of this bristly, weird feeling. But they seem so genuine. These are nice people and exactly what you said. I guess this is what we do now. I mean, I don't know why. I don't know what it means. I don't know. But I don't know. There's something real here. And for me, and this is where I'm sure the turn happens for you, Danielle, who we just had lunch with.
Yeah.
She is friends with different friends I have in high school and all this stuff. And she says, you should come to church with me. Huh. And I walk into the Vineyard wearing a suit because I thought, I know kind of the rules. I know how this works. And I'm walking in and there's a guy in tank top and flip-flops in front of me. And I remember being I don't know a lot, but I know that guy doesn't know what's going on. So I remember thinking,
it's amazing how fast you become an expert on kind of church polity. It's I remember we're brand new Christians and we're sharing our faith with Nancy's sister's husband, and I remember, and he was already in movement or whatever, but we prayed together and he kept his eyes open. And I went to someone afterwards and said, "Oh man, this guy, he doesn't get it at all." I'm in faith for a few weeks.
Totally. I've got
I
this.
know all about how this works.
I know how this works. Yeah,
you got to close your eyes for it to count.
Totally. Yeah. So next thing I know, I'm in, and it was oh my goodness. Like, I understand what the people are saying. Like,
Wow.
the songs make sense. And like this experience I've had with God, they describe as like normative. Like, this is the way the world is. You can hear from God and God will help you. And you have these experiences. I'm like, oh my goodness, this other church I was in, they looked at me like I was insane. Like, why would you, you wouldn't think God could actually like talk to you. And I'm like, that's the only reason I'm here. Like, why would I be here if that didn't happen? Anyway, so I had a very similar, like, what am I guess, but very sincere. Okay, if that's what this is, I'll do it. You know, like, so tell me how it then starts to turn out of stained glass and churches that don't talk about Jesus.
I think we had to get permission from somebody older and wiser. It seemed like such a, well, you went to church, you joined a church, you stay in that church. And,
right.
And I think someone in conversation said, if you don't really feel like you're growing there, maybe try something else. And a lot of our friends from, had been swept up in faith in the Jesus movement, and they'd all kind of landed at this evangelical Presbyterian church. And so we started to go there, and they, again, now we're in this environment of more kind of intimate faith or something, how you would describe it, and good people, kind people, but still the experience of church itself and the pastor. It was a very large church and a very good communicator, but the service lasted 55 minutes, and it was the longest 55 minutes of my life. I mean, stand up, sit down, a few organ-led hymns and choir, and I found it brutal. I thought, I think it was that point. You would think it would be earlier, but at that point I started to think, wow, I got to be in church for the rest of my life as a Christian. I began to think, maybe the way to go out is in a blaze of glory. Maybe I find somewhere in the world where they're killing Christians. I'll be a missionary there, and it'll be over. Like, that's how bad I found it. I thought, oh my gosh.
I need an exit plan. Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
And this was, very live.
These are good people, right?
Yeah, this is not. The judgment is probably more on me than anything, but I just found it so incredibly boring and so irrelevant to the kind of relationship I was trying to cultivate with God and how He was meeting me in the Bible. And I've always thought from that day that one of the greatest sins of church life is we managed to make Jesus a boring figure.
Right.
Because He's anything but boring.
Yeah.
He's absolutely transformative and challenging and revolutionary and will stretch you and surprise you. And so it would just seem like such a waste.
Yeah, I baptized a guy today, and he's been around our church for a while. And people were always trying to persuade him, give his life to Jesus. And he knew he needed something, but he'd been raised in an atheist home. And so we did a little testimony time with him today. Here's the thing he said to the room. It was so cool. He said, if you're here and you're not sure what you think about Jesus, you'd be exactly where I was not that long ago. Here's what I want to tell you. Here's the thing that turned it for me. As I started reading the Bible, specifically the Gospels, and I started asking, what if this is true? Instead of interrogating it, like, I'm just going to apply like a little bit of faith. Like, if this is true, what would that mean? What would it mean that God came and talked this way, and He did these kinds of things, and He died, and He rose again? What would it mean? And he goes, and it just changed everything for me. Wow. Because I started to see God interacting with me the way Jesus interacted with people in the Gospels. And he said, so if you're here and you know what you're doing, just read the Bible. Like, whatever these Christians are trying to do, sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not helpful. If you just read the teaching and the life of Jesus, it'll change your life. And I just was watching him, and then we baptized him, and I thought, it really is kind of that straightforward. Like, it really, to just bump into the teaching of Jesus, just the teaching of Jesus, let alone that He died and rose again, is pretty transformative. And yet we do all this other super fun, exciting, random stuff. Okay, so you're doing that. When did you start to say, man, I think maybe I have a call on my life? Like, I think I'm supposed to do something with this.
Never. No.
You're still sorting that out right now.
Yeah. I'm 67. I'm still asking that
I
question.
wonder, what will I do with my life?
No, I think that, so what happened was, because of the way I came to faith, not just through reading the Bible, but feeling, like I always felt I understood what it was to be without hope and without God in the world. Like that idea, like I identify with that. I know what that is and feels like, and how, and I felt like that I knew, literally, I was willing to give up everything to know Him and to share that. But I had no idea how that would actually happen. And of course, I was trying personally to do that with little knowledge or wisdom and making a lot of really embarrassing mistakes, and how I approached people, or things that I said to people I really cared about that were like really stupid. And so I was doing it very poorly. But I thought the church is no help at all. Like I couldn't invite anybody to this. And I thought I kind of landed in this place as I, went deeper into study, where I thought maybe it's just ideas. Because maybe if I wrote books that somehow carried over this encounter thing that I've had with Jesus in the Bible, maybe that could be helpful.
Which makes sense.
So I started thinking that way.
Because you're trying to jump this other thing that makes no sense to you. Like
no sense.
Whatever this is.
And my own kind of personal ineffectiveness. There was some success, but largely like I'm really awkward and uncoordinated at this. And I come off like, I come off like insensitive. I'll never forget one time I'm trying to, one of my wife's aunts had a traditional denominational connection and faith. I think it was very sincere, very real. But I was trying to push her towards something more. That wasn't enough. And I remember, because in those days, some of those who are listening will remember, everybody read, the late great Planet Earth. And, it's all of its craziness about the end times. And I was telling her, this is urgent. Look at the headlines, look, like He's coming soon, and this thing and that thing, and she looked at me so disappointedly, and she said to me, David, you seem so happy describing what is really the death of millions of people. And I felt so bad. I thought, really, how did? That's not what I'm meaning at all, but how would I get to this place?
I'm caught up in some weird thing.
I just felt like it was, I thought, wow, her faith elevated and mine shrunk. Like who's the real human being in this discussion?
Totally.
It's like, who would Jesus want to sit on their side of the table?
Totally.
It wasn't mine. And so you just realize, oh my gosh, if anything good's going to come of my life and my intention, it's going to have to be much more informed, much more empowered, much more graced, much more dynamically led than what I was doing. So from that, I thought, because I was coming to, in university, after I became a Christian, I switched everything. I was studying economics, and then I switched it all to help me understand the Bible better. And so they let me, in the history department, kind of do my own thing. And I got a degree in ancient history by studying Greek, Roman, and Egyptian history. And I learned to read classical Greek and some modern Hebrew and some hieroglyphics, and all just to have background to the Bible, just wanting to know the Bible better. My mother, everyone, what are you going to do with this? I have no idea what I'm going to do with this. But then I graduated, and I got the law school offering me a place, and I've got the history department saying, hey, you should do your doctorate in history. Like they had no students. Like, they were like hungry.
Like just keep coming, right?
Hungry for someone.
Yeah, you're smart. Let's keep going.
You do this.
Right,
and I'd said, Nancy and I are married by this point, and it's like, I don't know. And I heard about, because a friend of mine there was friend-to-friend connections about Regent College in Vancouver, British Columbia. And it was this interesting place where they weren't a seminary, they weren't turning out pastors then. They were just this graduate school that, say, particularly for professionals, maybe you're a lawyer or a doctor, you could take a year out, invest in your faith with, kind of rigorous academic, approach. And that just very much appealed to me. I thought I'll go do that. And they were offering a master's program, and J.I. Packer was moving there, and I liked his book. And
boy, who doesn't like his book?
God.
Yeah.
And so I said, we'll go there, Nancy and I. And so we moved there in 1979, and I did, again, no career path, no plan. Certainly didn't want to be a pastor.
Right.
But I thought, in the world of ideas, if I can work on this more, maybe I could be helpful. And
learn and write and So then you end up at Regent.
Yeah.
And then how do you bump into the Vineyard?
So I bump in the Vineyard. I did my master's degree, and I was a teaching assistant for a New Testament professor, and he had links to a scholar in Cambridge where he had studied, and so he was trying to open doors, and all of that seemed to fall into place. And I thought, well, I'll just keep studying. I don't know when you stop,
right.
but I'll just keep studying, and maybe something will get clear. And so I don't remember exactly how we got invited, but this is 1981, and Blaine Cook, who was one of John's colleagues and was in particular kind of used in power ministry, he shows up in the lower mainland area of British Columbia at some Mennonite church, and I think at the invitation of the youth pastor there or something. And I don't know how for sure we heard about it, but there was a bunch of Americans that had gone to Regent that were now working in churches in Vancouver. It was probably along that network, and we went, and it was like something.
What do you mean?
It was like Blaine calling out words of knowledge and doing the stuff.
Yeah, people getting healed.
Yeah, and getting touched, and that's not Canada, that's not Vancouver, that's not Mennonite. It was like a contrary contrasting thing, and so it made it seem even more remarkable or convincing. So that was the first exposure, and that was interesting, but not overly dramatic. But the thing that changed everything for us was one of those American friends in Vancouver who'd gone to Regent, was now working with churches, was named Ken Blue. And Ken had written and goes on to write a number of books for InterVarsity, a really good book on healing, the authority to heal. But he at the time, he was kind of burnt out on ministry that he was doing, and he decided to go down to Southern California and do a D-Min at Fuller. And he went there, and John's doing this class, Signs and Wonders and Church Growth, and he goes. And not only is he burnt out from ministry, but he's physically in a lot of pain and discomfort. He has real serious back problems. So he goes to this class, he gets healed, physically healed in this class. And he gets transformed in terms of how to do ministry, by his experience. So he comes back to us, and we all go, "Who's this?"
Because you'd known him in pain, kind of tired, burned out, right?
And he's, like this, always, super smart and bold, but this was someone moving in power. Like, how'd this happen? He said, well, you guys got to check this out. So John does his first conference outside of Fuller Seminary, the same title, Signs and Wonders and Church Growth. He does it in his church. And this whole little pack of friends, at Ken's urging, we all go down to that conference, and for the first time I saw what I saw of the Vineyard. I saw this just really lovely form, culturally accessible form of worship. I was called it like the Eagles got saved, the best of Southern California soft rock, but used to worship God. Then there was this funny, conversational, really natural. John was humorous. I'm just a fat man drinking a Diet Coke thing. that it was so relatable. Like, was none of the pretension, none of the robes and deep voices and, all the pretense of religious form. And then the naturally supernatural. I had always believed just by reading the Bible that God helped people and could encounter He encountered my life. He brought freedom and mercy and a start at growth and change. So that was not a problem. But what I rejected up to that point was all the models I saw.
Yeah.
Whether it was the Pentecostal TV models or the kind of shepherding things that were in Kansas City that were very charismatic, but just seemed controlling and abusive.
Yeah.
And so none of that fit. But here's the Vineyard, this, hey, take it if you need it kind of approach. And I just thought, I could do church this way.
Yeah.
I could do this. Like, for the first time, I saw that church could be helpful in what was in my heart to do, which was reach people like me who were far from God, but their life would be utterly different if they met Him.
Registration is now open for our 2024 Better Together Conference. Better Together is a Vineyard USA conference that seeks to thoughtfully discuss race, gender, reconciliation, and the multi-ethnic church while moving us intentionally towards being beloved community. This conference is for everyone. Even if you aren't a part of one of our formal associations, we would love to have you join as we grow together. Better Together will feature insightful plenary talks from dynamic national leaders, as well as multicultural worship led by a diverse group of worship leaders and musicians. Attendees will have an opportunity to attend workshops designed to equip and empower leaders to creatively champion kingdom diversity in their churches and communities. And each association will have a few specifically targeted workshops that are only for folks who are part of that association. It is only as we learn to better relate as sisters and brothers in Christ, dependent on the Holy Spirit, that we can be shaped into beloved community. If this excites you, we need you here at this conference. We are indeed better together. Check out the details on the Vineyard USA webpage or at bettertogether.vineyardusa.org. See you there.
And it's so interesting to me how many ways people enter into the Vineyard.
Yeah.
But however they come in, almost always they say something like that. I could do church like this. So they might have a church Christian background, and maybe they were in a really kind of dry, dead, cessationist thing or whatever, and they're like, oh, wow, this has like life. Yeah. And I'm experiencing God. Or they come from a really intense, weird Pentecostal thing, and they're like, oh, this is like normal. Like you, or that sort of evangelistic, man, God rescued me. I want this for my friends.
Yeah.
This is the kind of place I could bring somebody. Like I couldn't bring somebody to the church I grew up in, but I could bring them here. And I'm sure it's true for you in Lancaster and the church you led for 30 years. It's true here. There's folks that for their own sort of spiritual experience will go to another church in our city. Like I want more of the Bible, or I want to worship for 2 hours in a row or whatever. But when they want their friend to hear about Jesus,
yeah,
they bring them to our church. It's happened over and over. Yeah. All of a sudden I look over and be like, wait a minute, don't you go to the other place because you wanted to? And they're like, yeah, but like I've got this friend who needs like to hear about Jesus. Like, so I thought I got to take him to the Vineyard.
Yeah. You know, when I first went to the Desert Vineyard, Brent Rue, the founding pastor there, had gotten sick. He had cancer, very tragically. And we had been friends, and we had traveled together with John previously. And I was in England, and Brent came there very ill, and we just wanted to go see him and talk. But then he springs it on me, you know, like, would you come and, you know, take over this church? And which I did not think that I would do at all, but wanted to be his friend and at least go look at it. And then God surprised us by calling us there, by telling us to do it. But when I first got there, because it had been through this long season, both of grief of watching their founding pastor, you know, battle cancer and ultimately go to the Lord. But also, Brent had, been so enamored by the Kansas City thing, the prophetic, but also the call to prayer and holiness as kind of a prerequisite for God doing some big thing, and that tends at a local church level to paralyze things, make it inward and just like, well, what's it worth doing right now? If there's a big thing coming, and we got to pray harder, and we got to fix ourselves and be holier, and it just turns into this cycle. So I come to this church that's in this place that's had, the last few years, some history of, they might have a service that lasted for 2.5 hours.
Wow.
Or one that, it just was...
just wild. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just whatever. And I would interview people that were there. I just would talk to them about the church. Like, what do you love about the church? Oh, I love the church. I love Brent. And I love, this or that. And I would always end my interview with them by saying, and, you got your boss. He doesn't believe, your mother-in-law, she needs to find God. Or I said, do you invite them? Oh, no, I would never do that. I would never. They was consistent.
Right.
I would never do that.
Right. Which tells you everything, doesn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if we had told this story before, but so after, I wanted to change that. That was the first thing I wanted. I wanted the church to be helpful to people's witness, to people they care about. If we're not that, what the heck are we doing?
Right.
But anyway, every time we took a vacation, I was just in this mindset of, we would take a vacation and I would search out the nearest vineyard. I'd just attend. I'd just show up.
Yeah.
Partly because I wanted to support and bless, but also I just wanted to see. And I think early on we vacationed in Santa Barbara, and beautiful community, and we went there and we were there over a Sunday, and sure enough, I knew there was a vineyard there because at one time, I think it had been planted by Jack a little, I'm not quite certain, but it had been big. It would have been 1,000 people or something, and it was a big church. Yeah. And I knew that it wasn't that anymore, but I thought I'll go find...
Yeah, let's go see it. Right.
Find what is, So I searched it out. It was in an industrial area, big old warehouse, and on the very end of the warehouse, the corner of the warehouse, is the vineyard. And the whole rest of the warehouse, a massive warehouse, is the Calvary Chapel. And so I go to the vineyard, I walk in, and it's kind of this long hallway to it's not much space, but there are like kids riding the bicycles in the hall, and balls I think I get hit by a ball that was being kicked, and there's no adult like at the door, like nothing. So I want, where I hear music, very
war
loud
zone,
music.
Right.
I battled my way back, and there's the room, a small room, playing worship at a, it's like, this is Spinal Tap, number 11, and kids everywhere, or not, they're not that many, but there are kids all over.
Yeah, it's just wild,
and, 30 or 40 adults, and they're worshiping away, and so I find a place in the stand in the back, and worship goes on for an hour and 15 minutes. Wow. And then the pastor gets up and starts prophesying to everybody he knows, and no one's even like acknowledged me or like
knows you're there.
Nothing.
It seems, right.
And I realized at about the hour 45 mark that we haven't got to the sermon yet, if there is one. But I'm out.
I can't do this. Right, I gotta go.
I pull the ripcord, the chute opens. I'm out.
Right.
And I'm thinking, I'm right here. That this Calvary has like 3 morning services.
Right.
So I walk the long length to their entrance. Big room full of people. It's probably the 3rd service. I sit down. Worship's, in my estimation, was like,
not that great.
No,
right.
Not that great. The guys doing announcements and stuff. It's like not that great. And then they'd say, say hi to somebody next to you. And I turn and I shake hands with this woman, and we strike up a little conversation, and she says, are you live in Santa Barbara? I said, no, I don't. I actually live, way up in Lancaster and Palmdale. Oh, Lancaster. what do you do there? I said, well, I'm actually a pastor. You're a pastor? I said, yeah, I'm a vineyard pastor. She says, do you know there's a vineyard right next door? I said, I do know that. I do know. And she says it kind of conspiratorially to me. She leans in, whispers, I used to go to the vineyard. She said, but my husband would never go. And he's sitting next to me now. He'll come here.
Wow.
I just thought, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Yeah.
How indulgent can we be if we can't even help some faithful person in our church whose husband hasn't found faith? If we can't somehow be, the way we do church doesn't help them at all, like that just seems crazy.
Yeah, they can't bring their friend. They can't bring their neighbor. They can't bring their spouse or their son or their daughter or, yeah. It's just interesting to me to see. I mean, it's the thing you just did there where you said, I asked people in the church, what do you love about the church? Tell me about how long you've been here. Why do you keep coming? And could you bring your friend? That last one's a key one. So whenever I get to be with church planners or pastors of their churches seem stuck, because every pastor says they want their church to grow.
Yeah.
Every pastor says they want to see people come to know Jesus, right? Like literally every single one. There's nobody that's like, I don't care that people don't know Jesus. They do. They don't realize how many barriers they're putting up, or they're forgetting about people they should be paying attention to. And if the answer to that is no, I am not bringing my friend, then the next question should be, well, what kind of church would you bring your friend to? Like, what would it be like? And it's amazing to me how many folks we've even seen come to Christ, grow up in our church, really develop, but they get caught in some other little thread where they stop thinking about people who love Jesus or don't know Jesus or who are their family, or they kind of get into this little bubble, and then they show back up and look at us as leaders and say, well, why don't we do more of this other thing?
Only takes 2 months. 2 months from a person finding faith,
right?
To go from, I found faith because you made something that included me, to being the person who wants it just to be about me.
Yeah.
It only takes 2 months.
Yeah. Well, when you said something yesterday, the day before, when you were with our leaders, which was effectively saying, if helping people who don't know Jesus feel safe, comfortable, and connected in your environments, and making that the top priority, if it's not the top priority, it will slide off the table. Like it'll go from, it can't be number 2. Like if it's number 2, it becomes number 10. Tell me about how you've come to that conviction, or maybe I didn't say it quite right. But how
in part, it came, I spent 2 years in England. John Wimber loaned me to David Pitches, who was beginning a ministry called New Wine, a very successful ministry of renewal and change and strengthening of particularly historic churches. So I was there for 2 years. I did 200 events in 2 years. I was in every kind of context. And at the time, in the aftermath of some Vineyard effect and Kansas City effect, the revival was coming to England in October of 1990. So there was a lot of feeling about what do we do for revival and that kind of thing. And I would be in all of these churches, and my experience was no different, back home, that, we love the thought of revival. The Big Bang is thrilling to us, but nobody is fruitful week to week. They just aren't. They don't exist. I went to back to Kansas City to be part of my childhood friend Mike Bickle's thing in the early days, in the mid-'80s, and was there while we grew it grew from 600 to 4,000.
Wow.
And I can't name a convert. I can't name one. Someone who didn't know Jesus, but there was a lot of people. I used to be a Presbyterian, but now I'm this, but I just thought that it just can't be. So, and all those groups all want to see people find faith.
Yeah.
But unless you make it your intention that what you do serves people finding faith, serves the people who are part of your community sharing their faith, and that if it's not, used to call it a ruthless priority because it does involve the sacrifice of other things.
Yeah.
In order to make room. And I looked, when I went to the Desert Vineyard, I looked at, and I thought, I just want to be fruitful in terms of people connecting with Jesus who are not. And I thought of everything, that I knew of, present and past,
Right.
What has ever been effective for people to come to faith, from crusade evangelism to John's Power evangelism to
door to door, whatever.
Exactly,
Right. Anything.
like seeker-sensitive approach, whatever. I wrote it all down, like a dozen things, and I had, one of those significant times of prayer where I said, Lord, what do you want me to do? Here I am. This is kind of a blank canvas. It's a church in crisis. There's not a lot just to maintain here. It's not going to survive But here's what I want. It's the only thing that I want to do is I want to reach people. How do I do it? And I felt so clearly the Lord say to me, take 2 steps towards distant people and I'll meet you there. Like it wasn't a matter of getting the program right.
Yeah.
It was a matter of getting the posture right.
Yeah.
Like take a couple of steps towards really, I want to engage with people who are distant from God. And the advantage in the Antelope Valley and northeast LA County is, there's more in common with the urban core of Los Angeles than any other suburban part of it. We're the farthest away, but we're, have the same crime and gangs and poverty, drug problems as the urban core. So the life is stripped down and they're like, how does life work? That it's not like, my daughter was pastoring in the Palisades, and it's not like, no one's here today because they're all paintballing in Dubai. You're not competing in the Antelope Valley with people going paintballing in Dubai over the weekend.
Totally.
Like, is my marriage going to work?
Right.
Can I pay the bills?
How do I get off this drug?
Yeah, exactly. How do I get sober?
Totally.
How do I not backslide into being where I was? I mean, or just in life. We're not talking about faith. We're talking about life. And so things stripped down like that, when, people in that place are so much more likely, if the hint comes to them, wow, that this place, this church, people are finding answers to those kind of questions, and it's making a difference to them.
They'll come swarming.
Yes,
totally.
It's not a problem.
Well, where are they going to go if they don't go there? Yeah. Well, and I remember I got to visit your church, which was like one of my favorite churches I've ever been in, by the way. I've said that over and over. And what I loved...
Not very discerning.
No, well, yeah, maybe not.
That's part of what we appreciate about you as being the national director.
Exactly. Your low discernment. And so I remember going, because, I've really loved your preaching. I said this when I introduced you. I think you're one of the best preachers I've ever heard in my life. I love hearing you preach. I love how your mind works. You're obviously very academic, which I like. And so, you form in your mind images of what you think something will be like because you've known someone, right? Like this group of friends. You think, I bet their house will be like this. Or I bet, I've never met their wife. I bet their wife will be like this, and I've never met, maybe I've known their family, but I've not known their friends or whatever. Well, I always love playing the game. I wonder what car somebody drove here. I'm going to go meet them for breakfast or something. I went, I bet it's this car. Okay. So you do that, whether you mean to or not. So I'm showing up at your church. I don't know anything about Antelope Valley or Lancaster. I don't know anything. And I just remember being like, what in the world is this? Because you had high-level military, super smart, kind of some corporate folks that are in the sort of military contracting thing. So I'm meeting like this super put-together person, that other person. But the vast majority, like what I remember the most is the front row. I think the front row of 15 people to my right. I can see them right now in my mind. Stage right, front row. I bet between the 15 people there, they had 7 teeth. I mean, these were people that just looking at them, they've gone through some stuff.
You knew life was hard.
You can just see it. And they are worshiping their hearts out. You could see folks that look like they were in the adult film industry or had been. A lot of really beat up people. And what I've loved, what I loved is, so I meet this colonel from whatever base is near there.
Edwards. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And then I walk down, and then there's these people all hugging me, and I'm with you, and they are just gravitating toward you, like person after person, just hugging you, talking to you. You know, you're so connected. Then got to see kind of the food pantry, the different things you were doing, some of the city work, and I just thought, wow, I really miss this. I did not see this as David Parker's church. Knowing David, academic, bright, brilliant preacher, I in my mind saw this sort of like studious, like, you know, I'm just telling you, I don't think I've said this to you until now. I waited till the very end.
Yeah,
We're almost done.
I love it.
I just had thought in my mind, like I'd heard stuff you'd done at New Wine. I'd known you in some prophetic environments. Okay, so there's going to be some of that. I knew your heart for evangelism because I've heard you preach. But to be in the context and go, wow, this is a guy who's just taken his gifts and loved a city. He loved this place. Tell me about that a little bit. Like, I'm sure you could have gone a lot of places. And I'm always a little thrown off when I talk to a pastor. It's like, I don't know, I'm preaching, I live in XYZ, Iowa. It's kind of the middle of nowhere. I don't know what this place is, but whatever, I guess I'm here because my wife's family's here, whatever, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It always kind of throws me off. Like, tell me about how you work through, because the people you're describing, that I'm describing, that made up most of your church, and I'm making a slight assumption here, my hunches weren't sort of your people, so to speak.
Yeah.
Like, these aren't people that share probably a lot of your common interests. They're not reading the books you're reading.
Yeah.
How do you do that as a pastor?
Well, it starts with, the Lord asked me to do it. Like,
yeah.
I really sensed that He was saying, this is your people. So that kind of cuts across.
Then now I'm in. Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I think that there is a certain humor in the Bible about the people God picks for different people groups. Moses, who's raised Egyptian. Yeah, go be the deliverer of the Hebrews,
Right.
He smells Egyptian. He talks Egyptian. He looks Egyptian. Paul, this Pharisee of Pharisees, send him to the Gentiles. He's never liked one in his life before, but I'm sure he'll be great. And then Peter, who he's the bumpkin from the Galilee who can't pronounce Hebrew letters right. And so let's send him to the... I just think God doesn't care much for our niche or where we fit best. And maybe that's because in an environment where it stretches us beyond those things that makes more room for God. I don't know.
Yeah.
I do know I had the natural advantage of having grown up, not in poverty, but in, hard times, in a hard neighborhood.
Yeah.
A couple of the kids I grew up with shot and killed relatives, one their father, one their brother. These are just kids who lived in the neighborhood, that I hung out with, There was a lot of violence, a lot of domestic garbage, and a lot of, people were poor.
Yeah, so it wasn't completely unfamiliar.
So I identified with it. Like I don't look at, I don't know what that's like or who these people are, Like that never was part of it. I always thought, I know you. Like, I know you. And I care about you. They were the, as well as all those people, but they were the very people that I thought, well, you need most what hopefully I found and want to share with you. And but there was also a theological conviction that I have that I don't think everyone shares. Pretty sure they don't. But I don't think it's so outside the box that it's indefensible. But as I read the New Testament, there's no gift of evangelism. It's not in the list. There's not. I know there's the ministry in Ephesians 4, but those Ephesians 4 things are all equipping, fathering, parenting kind of roles that are multiplying that effect in the life of God's people. And so I don't doubt that there are people who can do that, who can equip and multiply, evangelism. But But the gift of evangelism, there is no such thing. And my conclusion from that, and it is a conclusion from silence, so that's not the strongest, but that every gift is required. Every single gift is required to do evangelism. Nobody feels adequate. If your neighbor, they need counseling, they need deliverance, they need healing, they need an apologist, they need, who's up to all that?
Exactly.
Very few people. And that's why if we're relying on those kind of people to do all the harvesting, then no wonder everyone finds faith.
Yeah.
But my feeling was the whole church with all of its gifts, hospitality, and, all the gifts, if they're used in a way that reaches for people who don't know, there will be an effect. And so in my life personally, I would say my primary gift was, probably teaching. I don't really think I'm that much of a pastor, but I care. I definitely care.
Yeah.
And so, but it was just a decision that I was going to use my gifts in an outward way. I was going to not use my gifts just to, feed the sheep. I was actually going to try to pursue the lost ones.
Yeah.
And if you intentionally use your gifts in that way, and in a community, the best thing, this idea of community doing it together, then there's the greatest chance of this being really fruitful and ongoingly fruitful.
Yep.
I mean, we went through a stretch of time where if you told me that you would see 20 or 30 people find faith a month after month, year after year, I would have said that's revival. But it didn't feel like a revival. It was just what was happening in the life of the community. And the rich get richer. Once people start gravitating towards you because they think, number one, I'm going to be welcome there, and number two, I might get help there. This might help me.
Yep.
It's like that creates this momentum, this current that's, that more, it starts to multiply.
Yeah, that's right.
And initially when I went and I started changing things, there was just no effect. And I remember, thinking, because I felt like I would call people to faith every week, and no one ever, the first 2 years, no one ever responded.
2 years.
2 years. And
Wow.
It took that long, honestly, for people who were in the church. We lost a bunch of the people, but it was kind of like a transfusion. A bunch of Christians came at the same, so it didn't look like it was, declining, but it was all different because people had left and other Christians had come who think, I like what he's doing, whatever. But it wasn't people finding faith. It took 2 years for people to develop the confidence that I can invite my boss or my mother-in-law or whoever and not be embarrassed, not have it be a deficit in my desire to share Jesus or just, offer what I have to them.
Yeah.
It took 2 years to let go of that. And after 2 years, I was like, suddenly it all changed in a weekend. And one weekend, nothing, and I never forget this. This weekend happens. I really feel led to abandon what I'd planned. And I talked about something else, and I just shared, kind of the gospel, and 50 people responded. We went from 0 to 50.
Wow.
And I thought, what?
Yeah.
And it was because finally people were, bringing their friend, whatever.
Yeah, they're in the room, right?
50 people
It
responded.
helps, yeah.
And I don't think everyone appreciates this story, but that very morning, a couple had been in the church from the beginning and had gotten very enamored by the prophetic and very enamored by Toronto and some things, and they came to announce to me that they were no longer going to attend the church because the Holy Spirit wasn't here anymore. And I said to them, I laughed, and I said, I would have agreed with you a few weeks ago. But this morning, 50 people found faith.
What's
if
that?
That's not the presence of God.
Yes.
I asked them, what was the presence of God? And they said, we don't smell the roses anymore. They didn't have an olfactory experience, so God wasn't present at work.
Wow.
I didn't even know what to do with that.
Right.
But
50
really,
people came to Christ.
But
that
it never
day.
stopped after that. But not always
Wow.
at that level. But it was always people finding faith, and not in the most, it wasn't in the most dramatic ways. Some of it were incredibly dramatic, but it was just the life of a community that's decided to share its gifts and its energy in an outward way.
Well, and I don't know the most recent stats, but there were years and years for the Vineyard where it was something like a third or sometimes half, but I think it might be now near a quarter, have not seen anyone come to Christ or done a baptism in the Vineyard.
Yeah.
So, like, what would you tell pastors that are just not seeing fruit? So you went 2 full years. What kinds of things would you say, just commit to this, or stay focused here, or here's a way you can think about your Sunday or your own life, or what would you say that you think you've seen helped you or really helps other people?
You know, I would want to say find a way anyway, because what the Lord said to me, take 2 steps. Like, how are you trying to engage with people who, there's so many people who are hungry. I mean, I know there's this whole anti-religion thing, and it's become more difficult in the last years because of politics and just the general estrangement of everything. And so I think there's a lot more suspicion with regard to church and that kind of thing. But how is it you intend to make connection? Like, where's the path of engagement? And if it's alpha, if it's we're going to do this approach of trying to serve people or share a faith with people, I think that's great. I just felt like, going back to the priority thing, that if you don't put your best resources into it,
and
then
prioritize,
it's gonna fall. It's you want it to be third, but it actually ends up 12th,
right?
and so I felt the best resource. I had this discussion with John. I told you about this. That John came to the Desert Vineyard when towards the last stages of his life, and he wasn't feeling well, and he. But John, in my history with him, had only ever been kind to me and had blessed me and supported me. But he comes up and we have dinner together before the Saturday night service, and he looks at me and he says, "David, why do you want all these non-Christians in your service?" Because we did have, hundreds of people I call them in process. They're just not convinced and not committed, but they've been coming, whether, off and on or whatever, they're there. They're in the mix. There's a process going on. And John was questioning me about why I would want that. And I was surprised by that because John, in my experience, was, evangelistically focused, certainly in his personal life. And yet I think that he didn't understand the mixture. It was kind of a little bit more like a sense of, well, people get saved out there, and then you bring them in to get them, cleaned up and filled up. And he said, you gotta, you do things in a way that allows people just to kind of remain, you haven't drawn the line, and I said, well, the reason I do that is because of you. He didn't appreciate that necessarily, but I said, it's what God gave you. And that we have in the Vineyard. We have this culturally connecting worship style. The Eagles got saved, and who's that for? We just wanted to update the hymnals of Christianity, or was that to make the connection with God and the presence of God that comes in worship accessible to people who do not relate at all to the 16th century musical form of traditional organ music? So it just, to me, pointed outward. Then we have this relational, conversational style of communicating. And then we have the naturally supernatural thing. We're not trying to be weird, but we believe God's present and powerful. Who's it for? It's for people. So why wouldn't I want them there? I mean, we've seen more people melted down, what I would call melted down and tenderized by worship that opens their heart to hear something from God. Forget me, but just hear something from God. You know this from preaching, that you're preaching this message, and afterwards someone will come and say, God spoke to me so clearly through what you were saying, and it has nothing to do with what you said.
Right. Yes.
But they were in a position for God to be near to them and
receptive.
address them.
Yeah.
Like, I would do anything. If I could go to a park and gather a crowd and get them in worship, but I can't.
Yeah.
But I have a church that worships.
Yeah.
Maybe I can invite them in and just make it possible so we don't send 1,000 little signals that say to them, you're unwelcome.
Yeah.
We didn't know you were coming and we don't care.
Yeah.
If we just remove those, maybe things start to move.
Well, and my prayer for every lead pastor, specifically if you preach, but also if you lead worship, is if you bring your friends, like you bring people that you meet, neighbors, friends of friends, family members that don't have faith, and just watch what happens in your own mind. like forget about what anybody else does.
Yeah.
Just in your own mind. Like all of a sudden, imagine whatever you did this last Sunday, you walk in and there's your neighbor. Here's what you'll notice most pastors do. If they're honest, they start changing their sermon. They don't know they're doing it, but they start subtly being like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah,
I can't say that. That doesn't really make that much sense. I know this guy. That'll be offensive. But I want him to hear about Jesus, and I don't really have the right kind of stuff to say for a person who doesn't know Jesus. So I'll mix this in over here. Worship pastor literally would just change the set. Like, okay, I got to pick songs that make sense.
Yeah.
Whatever we were about to do, that's gone. You do the announcements different because your friend's sitting there. Your mom is sitting there. Your brother, your cousin. And here's the thing that convicts me is every single week, somebody brought that person that they love and care about.
Yeah.
And they're trusting us.
That's right.
And it's this awkward experience when often you'll be standing in front and they'll walk up to you and be like, I brought my brother. And it's this subtle way of being like, you're not gonna mess up, right? Like you're gonna get this right. I know you're good, but I just wanted to let you know he's here. And it's this gentle way of being like, please do the right thing for my brother. And yet that's a real trust that people won't just give you. But I find that the most evangelistic churches have pastors, worship leaders who are bringing people.
Yeah.
They're inviting. Because it changes the way you think.
Mm.
They're investing and they're inviting. Now, I know we're all very busy. We all have lots of things to do. But I find that pastors at least have some connections. Parents from the soccer team that your kids are on, some neighbor, some friend, a business leader who's a friend of an elder in your church that you met at the thing. If you're intentionally investing in those people's lives and you're inviting them, and then maybe even asking them, like, what kind of church would you go to? And here's because I've said up front to people often, the reason I'm asking is this: you're the exact kind of person I would like to see in the life of our church. And they'll often be like, really? Why? I'm not a Christian. I don't care about what you're doing. That's why.
Yeah.
I don't exist to help Christians just have a little bit of a nicer day or something. I think we're a part of helping people come into a full life with God. Now, and I want to pastor people well. I want their lives to improve. I want them to grow.
Yeah.
But man, if we're not engaged in that kind of stuff, and I'm amazed at how often people will just tell me, if there's a church where I felt like they were honest and they told the truth. Sometimes they said something crazy, like if you had, great whiskey, I'd probably, whatever. They'll say something crazy. But it's usually the stuff you would expect. It's honest. It's authentic. I feel welcome. I feel comfortable. I kind of know what's happening. I know when to leave. I know what to do. I don't have to do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, there's room for me to decide.
That's right.
How I'm going to react.
That's right.
Respond.
You're not going to make me, all of a sudden I'm kneeling because I don't want to be the only guy not kneeling or, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that stuff. It's not usually as hard as you think it is, but it often requires knowing one person that you care about. It takes one.
Yeah.
And then once you care about that person, you start to build a culture. But Okay, so let me take a hard right turn because
I want to say one more thing.
Say one more
about that.
thing, please.
Yeah. So I used to say to my church about this, that what we're trying to do is not be a family.
Yeah.
We are a family. We're just trying to live radically as a family, where our doors always open and there are extra places always set at the table.
Yeah.
And that we're inviting people to join us.
Right.
And therefore that costs us something. We pay a price to do that.
Yeah.
Like the door's open, we're not going to sit around in our underwear watching TV. Right. Like we're actually going to have an expectation that someone might
They
walk
might
through.
come. Right, yeah. We invited them.
When they sit at the table, we're not going to pray before the meal because we're a family. We're just not going to pray in such a way that isolates them or makes it seem like, this isn't for you.
Yeah.
We're not going to talk about things without introductions or explanation. It's almost just like, how would you treat a guest? Like,
totally.
But the truth is, for most churches, like, you got guests. Like all the time you got guests. And if you don't, that's needs to change.
That says something.
Things need to get to a place where you would have guests. And so it's just not rocket science.
You would love, I kind of stole this from another pastor, but I would do this series where I use the exact analogy, and I called it like our church is the table. And I talked about the different chairs. So I talked about the orientation towards guests and what does it really mean to be a family. And then the last one, I said, but it's one thing that you're family and friends. But I had a huge prop made for this talk. I mean, I've never really used props. I had a prop made. And it was a adult-sized high chair. And so I said, we know we're a healthy church. You're actually a part of a church. When you're not the guest, you're not just the family, but you realize you're a host. And hosts do things. They clean up. Like if we're going to have guests, we just do things differently. We think about what they would want to eat. We make sure they don't have allergies. We make sure the kids have their clothes on, stuff we clean a little bit.
Yeah.
I always would joke with Danielle, because I'm not as wired hospitably. I'd always say, this feels like we're lying. Like, why would we, why do we pretend?
We're treating them better than our parents.
Exactly. Like, we don't clean like this for us ever. Anyway, so she'd always be like, that's ridiculous. And it is ridiculous. But anyway, and I said, so, so we're hosts and da-da-da-da. But what do most mature believers, when they think of their chair at the table, what is it that they're really thinking? They're not thinking this. What are they thinking? And I pull this sheet off this huge high chair. I climb in the high chair and I put the bib on and a little sippy cup. And I would go, feed me. Feed me. Why won't you feed me, Pastor? And I would just draw it out, like you make it.
I would have paid money to see that. Is there a tape of that we can see?
I just draw it out, just as awkward as I could make it, and keep going. And then I would preach that whole section sitting in the chair. I wouldn't get out of the chair. I'd say, there's people in the jungles of Brazil that don't even have a Bible. They don't have a Bible, but they're memorizing the scraps of the Bible they have. Here's the problem. You don't need any more food. Any doctor will tell you need diet and exercise.
That's great.
The truth is, you're just not well. You're like overweight and sick. And the church is not underfed. The church is sick and it needs to move towards people. It needs to host people. Anyway, needless to say, there were a bunch of people who would leave the church after I'd
compared them to a big adult baby with a sippy cup. Yeah, that would tend to kind of make you make a decision.
Yeah, it was intended to do that. I enjoyed it. I mean, like
sure.
it was.
I would enjoy it. I'd like to see it now.
It was great joy. Okay, so David, let's wrap like this. I've taken a lot of your time, but you've been in the Vineyard literally for like forever. I think the church you were in is like the second Vineyard church, the one that you right. I mean, like
third technically, because Ken ended up with 2. He moved to the San Fernando Valley, the original vineyard, and then he decided to move back to West LA, and he left people in the San Fernando Valley. So there was a second
orphaned
church. But then
people,
we were the
right.
first intentional church plant out of the original vineyard.
Exactly. So you've seen it all. You've been, and you've seen it all pretty up close. So there's any number of people who have been in the vineyard a long time, but you were in Kansas City. And you saw all the pain and the mess of that. You were honestly kind of the expression of a lot of the great stuff of the Vineyard in the Anglican Church, being with the New Wine folks, and you got to watch the sort of burgeoning movement of the UK. You've been around California long enough that you consider yourself California at this point. So you've seen all these different moves and ways we've been as the Vineyard. What would you want to say you feel the most sort of grateful for, what you feel the most hope for moving forward? Like what, because I've said it every time that I've gotten to talk about you this weekend. I'm just beyond grateful for you and for so many like you that made a way for somebody like me. So I see myself as really building off of and living out of the fruit of your life and so many others. So what would you want to say to us as we keep moving forward? What do you see that God has done, and what would you hope for? My commitment to the Vineyard certainly initially was born out of deep gratitude towards John Wimber. Mm-hmm. For the model and for, John had a very apostolic, I think, kind of inspiring to invest as in church, as a pastor, as a planter, But I was just grateful for that kind of influence in my life and the model and the exposure and even the opportunity. John took me, so many places and in those contexts, my gifts developed and my call sharpened. And so there was just a deep personal gratitude and loyalty to John. I think many in the Vineyard from the 80s, earlier 80s, mid 80s on, probably felt something like that. Yeah.
But I also had a sense of conviction about the Vineyard, the way that it was. Not we've taken so many detours and we have, ended up in some dead ends. But I felt like what God, quite remarkable what God had given the Vineyard with worship and ministry and our approach to kingdom theology and the way to, even, carry a message to people. Vineyard music or that style of worship that has been eclipsed by so many other things, but that's just everywhere in the world. Everywhere. Yep. And honestly, praying for the sick.
Yeah.
Even the most conservative cessationist, there's just so many things about what God gifted the Vineyard to be, were meant to be shared and meant to be, exchanged. But I felt that the unique combination of those things always has had its intent on being fruitful in terms of evangelism and people finding faith. So I've always longed for that to be more realized in the Vineyard. Yeah. And more celebrated in the Vineyard. I don't know. But I had in me this desire to always, I want to be a team person. I want to cheer on the Vineyard, and it's not been easy because there's been a lot of false steps and failures. But I just wanted to be for that. And so, Jay, we've come to this critical moment, of so much generational change and transition of, maybe a first or second generation of leader to another. There's so much that is in flux, and I'm so grateful, honestly, for you and all of your team and your leadership in this time. But I just hope that we find our joy and that we find our freedom in using our gifts for the benefit of those who need them most. Like,
if that could become we have always talked about movements or waves, within the vineyard. And I would love to see just like a fruitful witness wave, in the vineyard, from small church to large, that we would find our balance, find our footing to do things in a way that just, allows there to be just a real harvest, not a big bang necessarily, but a real harvest.
Yeah. May it be.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, I really appreciate your time, and I hope I can come back and talk to you some more.
You bet.
With any number of things that we're trying to figure out, it's great to have someone who can just give us the firsthand story. You've been super helpful over these days, even clearing up like some gaps. Like, well, so how did that work? And who's that? And
I've told crazy stories.
No, it's been great.
Crazy stories. Like you keep saying, really? Like, did that really happen?
I love it. I can't tell how much I love it. I'm so grateful for you, David. Thanks for giving us time.
Thanks, Jay.
The We Are Vineyard podcast is a production from the team at Vineyard USA. If you've been enjoying the podcast, here's a few ways you can help us. Leave us a review on the podcast platform of your choice. This helps more people find us. Connect with us online for additional resources. Our website is vineyardusa.org, and we're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at VineyardUSA. Thanks for listening. See you next week.